Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mafia and Gangsters video. Let's go ahead and let's talk about the wonderful book again, Super Mafia, Organized Crime Threatens America, continuing the next chapter within that series. I actually haven't touched this playlist in almost a year, so I thought I would dust it off here, and then that way we can go ahead and talk about the next chapter. Now the next chapter is pretty interesting. Last time I had finished chapter 4, chapter 5 has to do with the topic, the title is called Breaking the Banks. Apparently it delves into the world that mafioso gangsters had within banks and some of the bank's employees as well. So lots of interesting information to share here. I'll give my own thoughts and opinions as well. Let me know what you guys and gals think as always. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start chapter 5. And in this case, the title, the first subtitle of the chapter is The Root of the Evil. So here's what it says. Safe, reliable, trustworthy, responsible, security conscious. Bank depositors hope that terms like these describe their banks. Unfortunately, the behavior of some of the bank's employees has not always justified this hope. A surprising number have been implicated in mafia or other illegal activities in recent years. They include employees of notable institutions, both among the largest of the nation. Several states have seen their local banks embroiled in mafia scandals. There was also the case of the Blank National Bank, which had to be taken over by another bank for reasons that we shall explore. How do such things happen? Well, greed is the most common cause. Banking is a highly competitive business, and in the course of their competition, some banks get greedy. When that happens, they sometimes become careless. It's most likely to happen when someone comes into a bank offering big deposits. These can be a bank's lifeblood, for it is not only by lending out or investing its funds that a bank earns its profit, but the more cash available for these purposes, then the richer the bank becomes. The mafia understands greed, hence it understands the bank's open arms attitude towards big depositors. Now the next subtitle is The Banker's Disasters. Take the case of Ernie Palmieri and his bank, located there in Bloomfield, New Jersey. It was reported in Newsweek magazine early in 1981. Palmieri was the business agent for a New Jersey local of the Teamsters Union, widely believed to be run by the mob. He offered the bank a tempting deal. Substantial union funds would be deposited in low interest-bearing accounts, giving the bank a means of earning extra profits. A report by Assistant U.S. Attorney General Philip B. Heyman describes the effects. Once the bank had begun to rely upon such deposits and had made conventional loans based upon the new assets, the bank would be at the mercy of the racketeer because he could withdraw the union funds at will. All Palmieri asked in return was that the bank okay loans to some of his friends and relatives. These shady individuals, many of them known mafiosi, had no chance of securing legitimate loans at other banks. But as a favor to Palmieri and the Teamsters, this bank had to agree to issue the loans without requiring collateral or security of any kind. Bank President Robert Prodan later testified that he would never have approved such loans had it not been for those big union deposits. None of those loans were ever repaid. Having taken a catastrophic loss of $389,000, a fatal blow for such a small institution, the bank failed. Palmieri was eventually convicted of racketeering. Now, there was another bank in Chatham, New Jersey, which suffered a similar fate. Accepting large deposits from a vice president of the allegedly mob-linked retail store employees union, it eventually lent about $1 million to mobsters. Predictably, those mostly unsecured loans defaulted and the bank collapsed. Investigations by the U.S. Attorney and the FBI showed that more than $10 million had been lent out to mob figures and lost by small New Jersey banks since 1973. At least 4 banks had failed, and others were in serious danger. One of these, which was a bank there in Manville, had loans totaling about $750,000 to a firm run by a convicted extortionist. He had once been the partner of a notorious mafia enforcer. In another case, a Massachusetts bank was brought to the brink of collapse by a scam involving counterfeit securities. This trust company had granted loans totaling $2.5 million. It accepted as collateral some fake blue chip securities produced with impressive skill by a team of the Mafia's master counterfeiters. When the fakes were exposed, a vice president of the bank was discovered to have been cooperating with the racketeer who had furnished the securities, Anthony Orlandella. Banker and mobster were both convicted. The U.S. government then stepped in to rescue the bank from imminent failure. There have been cases where mobsters masquerading as legitimate businessmen placed sizable deposits within the banks and eventually got elected to the bank's board of directors. They would then approve or persuade their fellow directors to approve substantial loans without security and at low interest rate. These funds have often gone out to mafia loan sharks with their own astronomical interest rates ranging from 200 to 2,000% a year. The loan sharks could easily pay off the bank's loans, but they seldom bothered to do so. Next subtitle is The Drugs Deposits. Now, the case involving a Miami bank was different. It came under mob control after receiving heavy deposits from the Teamsters Union. It soon began to launder millions in mob revenues, mostly from drugs. According to Vincent Fat Vinny Teresa in his book, My Life in the Mafia, these deposits came out in the form of real estate, apartment buildings, and business ownerships. The government could trace all day and never find anything illegal. Now, Teresa had been the number 3 man in the New England Mafia family, allegedly headed by Raymond Patriarca. Feeling betrayed by his fellow mobsters, he became a government informant in the early 1970s. His testimony before the Florida Select Subcommittee on Organized Crime provided a graphic insight into the mob's laundering operations. In fact, here's what he says. The mobsters take their money and they put it in certain banks, and then certain banks take it and put it to work. In about a year or so, they bring it back to them, and it's all cleaned up for them. They've got it reinvested through 6 or 7 straw corporations, and now it comes back there. What was just a brown bag full of money comes back as a hotel under O.S. Corporation. But somewhere in the background, O.S. Corporation is owned by Vincent Teresa or Meyer Lansky or Raymond Patriarca or someone else in the mob. A money laundering case that startled the banking community broke in November 1982. That's where an account executive at a New York bank, rated among the top 3 banks in the country, was arrested along with 8 others. They were conducting a laundering operation that had already handled no less than $100 million, most of which had resulted from cocaine deals. The tremendous sums taken in by drug dealers sometimes became a problem because so much of the money is in $5 and $10 bills. In this form, it is hard to store and very unhandy for investment. The dealers inevitably turn to the banks, and some notable scandals have resulted. One involved a respected bank in New York. Its employees were being paid off by members of the Gambino family to exchange the small bills for easier to handle big ones. The bank eventually pleaded guilty to a charge of failing to report hundreds of small cash transactions, which added up to $8.5 million. It was fined $225,000, had to fire 25 employees who were involved in the transaction. Next one title is called The Pope's Banker. That there could be any connection between the mafia and high officials of the Roman Catholic Church seems unbelievable, yet the evidence has amounted during the past few years that such connections have existed. The man who stands at the center of this strange relationship is Michael Sindona. He is now serving a 25-year sentence in a federal prison at Otisville, New York. He was convicted in 1980 for masterminding a series of frauds that brought about the failure of a national bank. It was then ranked the 18th largest bank in the United States, and its collapse was the largest bank failure in the nation's history. Sindona had only been in the United States since 1971. Born in Sicily, he rose very swiftly in the world of finance. Ultimately, he arranged to be introduced to a number of high-ranking Catholic clergymen. Among these was Giovanni Montini, who later became Pope Paul VI. According to a 1983 book by Luigi Di Fonzo, St. Peter's banker Michael Sindoni, he impressed the Pope and the men around him as an unusually talented investment expert. In 1969, Sindona was granted a contract that officially made him the Pope's banker. This man, whom DeFonso referred to in a New York Magazine article as an international godfather involved with the mafia, narcotics, and murder, could now influence how the Vatican's very substantial financial resources were employed. Interviewed by USA Today in June 1983, DeFonso asserted that Sindona had been recruited in the Mafia in 1957. Sindona had then become a financial consultant to both the Sicilian Mafia and the New York Mafia families, advising them on how to launder their drug wealth and reinvest it in legitimate businesses. Backed by resources of this magnitude, Sindona eventually built himself a financial empire worth an estimated $500 million. Wow. It began to come apart in the 1960s, and DeFonso believes that the Vatican may have lost as much as $1 billion in the breakdown of Sindona's shady enterprises. Sindona then found it prudent to move to the United States. In 1972, within a year of his arrival, he had somehow managed to take over that national bank, but it collapsed 2 years later. Sindona was indicted in 1979. He was charged with conspiring to conceal from authorities his illegal transfer of $40 million from Italy in order to gain control of that American bank. And while heading that bank, he had fraudulently removed $15 million from its funds and then carried out speculations in foreign currencies that ended up costing that bank $30 million. After a lengthy and complicated trial, he was convicted. Meanwhile, American and Italian authorities agreed to have Sindona taken to Italy temporarily. He had been accused of conspiracy in another bank fraud case there, and also of arranging the 1979 murder of a courageous Italian magistrate who was steadily unraveling Sindona's many-faceted criminal operations. And then the last subtitle of the chapter is called The Mafia's Own Bankers, Loan Sharks. 4 basic rules define loan sharking operations. Number 1, they lend money to individuals who cannot obtain loan from banks or other legitimate sources. Number 2, they require no collateral or security. Number 3, they charge extremely high interest rates. And number 4, they punish failure to repay with violence. People who borrow from loan sharks are a diverse group. Many are gamblers who have gone into the hole with accumulated losses. Most are legitimate individuals seeking short-term loans to cover pressing debts. In a majority of cases, they are willing to accept the loan sharks' fearsome terms because they hope to pay the loans off within a brief period before those interest rates multiply to astronomical amounts. And they are willing to put their lives on the line because they have no other security to offer. The rate for small loans is the basis for the whole system, and a 6-4-5 is the rule. So in other words, you borrow $5, you pay back $6 in 1 week. If you borrow $5,000, then you pay back $6,000 in 1 week. That is a rate of 20%, but it is compounded weekly. If the loan is not repaid in a short time, the debt swiftly mounts to levels that make repayment virtually impossible. Loan sharks debtors caught in this bind have to struggle just to keep up with the interest payments, and they rarely cut down on the principal. Just by contrast, the normal bank rate for personal loans runs about 15% a year, and this is compounded only quarterly. Loan sharks' interest rates are known as vigorish. The vigorish can vary. It all depends on who the borrower is, how well the loan shark knows him, how reliable he is thought to be. Loans have sometimes been known to go out at the relatively low annual rate of only 200%. Loan sharks are generally content to carry a loan, even if the debtor has been unable to repay any of the principal, as long as he keeps up with the interest payments. It is when neither principal nor interest is repaid that things can get rough, with delinquent debtors winding up in the hospital. Stubborn cases may wind up in the morgue. In one case, 2 New York loan sharks had lent $5,500 to a plane dispatcher named Seymour Rubin. They collected over $30,000 in interest from 1980 to 1983. Then they were arrested and brought to trial. Rubin was scheduled to testify against them. One morning, as he arrived at his job, Rubin was shot 9 times with an automatic pistol, but the loan sharks were convicted anyway. The system can produce and has produced some dumbfounding results. A mob boss in New Jersey once lent out $75,000 at a relatively friendly 200%. Over the course of 3 years, he got back $400,000. Another loan shark was rewarded with a $2.6 million profit on a loan of $1 million for a single year, and still another one made over $6 million in 4 years. Many loan shark customers are legitimate businessmen. Those in seasonal businesses, such as garment and fashion industries, are the ones most likely to need such loans. In these fields, the risks are high. Everything depends on how the fickle public responds to each season's new styles. Firms that have a record of success have little trouble getting bank loans, but banks are understandably reluctant to take a chance on the more marginal companies. These have few alternatives other than the loan sharks. If the fashions they offer are not well received and they cannot repay their loan, the loan sharks' options too are limited. The usual first reaction is to threaten violence, either against the borrower, his family, his home, his place of business. And to ensure that the threat is believed, the loan shark's enforcer may even be called in to administer a nasty little sample. It generally produces results. The terrified debtor finds the money somewhere, somehow, at least enough to keep up with those relentlessly multiplying interest payments. In a Forbes magazine series on organized crime, investigative reporter James Cook quotes a loan shark in a phone conversation that was wiretapped by authorities. He says, "If they don't pay, we got their business. We take their trucks, whatever. Nobody ever rats you out," i.e. informs the police. "All you do, it's nice. You get to go in your car once a week and go collect your money. They give it to you, and they give it to you, and they give it to you, and they give it to you. If they forget it, they never ever touch the principal." In an increasing number of cases, there is a takeover, either partial or complete, of the business. The loan shark forces the owner to make him a permanent legal partner, receiving a regular share of the profits. According to Women's Wear Daily, the newspaper of the garment industry, at least 20 garment firms have come under mob control by the late 1970s. In recent years, such takeovers have been observed in a wide range of businesses besides the garment industry. It even happened to a few small Wall Street brokerage houses, and in some surprising cases, small banks have been the victims. Like any businessman in a highly competitive field, loan sharks are constantly on the lookout for new customers. They sometimes use unorthodox methods to find them. The New York State Investigation Commission recently uncovered a series of cases in which bank employees were being paid off. They agreed to inform Mafia loan sharks about bank customers who had exhausted the amount of credit available through legal sources. The loan shark would then offer the victims the welcome opportunity to obtain immediate substantial loans without having to provide any security whatsoever. They would, of course, pay the usual sky-high rates. August Piquois' book, Organized Crime, The Fifth Estate, tells the intriguing story of a successful hairdresser who fell behind on his payments to a mafia loan shark. He was persuaded to become the finger man for a string of burglaries run by the mob. He had to pass on useful information about his wealthy clients, telling the mobsters which ones kept valuable jewelry at home, for example, or which were planning to be on vacation. The hairdresser's share of the loot was then used to pay off his debt. Another startling case involved John Sonny Francesi, identified by police as a captain in the Colombo crime family and a prime candidate eventually to become its boss. Francesi was in federal prison serving a 50-year term. At a parole hearing in 1983 of March, evidence was presented showing that he had been loan sharking even while in prison. He had arranged for a $50,000 loan to the head of a New Jersey trucking firm. The debtor ended up paying more than $250,000 in interest between 1975 and 1982. Then that's it. That's everything associated with this chapter, Chapter 5 from Super Mafia, Organized Crime Threatens America. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. Interesting chapter, right? The title of it was Breaking the Banks, and it showed various examples, again, of both bank employees and banks and how they were involved within the world of mafia and vice versa. It reminded me a lot of the movie Casino, which has to do, of course, with the real-life characters of Frank Rosenthal and then also Tony the Amp Spilotro. And in various parts I'm reading actually, or I'm listening to the audiobook now, but yeah, in various parts of the movie, it showcases how Tony the Ant Spilotro was a loan shark, how he was essentially able to give out money to the people there working in the casinos or people that were otherwise gamblers, just as the chapter highlighted, seriously in debt, looking to get out of it. And so he would lend them this money, but in turn, it was an astronomical rate. I think there was at one point in the movie where he was stating that, or was it somewhere reading in the book? I can't remember, but it was something like 3% interest a week. So it comes out to 12% a month and then 144% a year, something like that. It was pretty high, in other words. So reading this example here involving at least a 20% weekly amount, that is huge, absolutely huge. You would never be able to get out of it because of the interest that's earning. You would have to hope for something very fortunate to come your way in order to pay it off as quickly as possible. Otherwise, after chapter highlights, then you'll have a situation where you'll be threatened, or worse, you'll be basically put to death, or the businesses will be taken over, or you'll have to pay through the business itself a certain percentage of everything made, or you would be involved in the crimes from that mafioso gangster. And then that way, whatever is quote unquote earned there would go towards your debt. And then, of course, it was highlighting some of the things involving the employees there, how they would tip off the mafioso people, and how some of the banks ended up actually accepting a large amount of deposits, easy deposits in their world, and they would in turn lend money, but it was never paid back, which caused them to face a lot of calamity afterward. But a lot of this, again, made me remember about that movie Casino, Tony the Ant Spilotro. I think I remember reading too that he never wrote any of that stuff down, that it was basically all in his head. Like everything that people owed him, it was essentially him keeping it in his memory, and then he would collect the funds and so on. So interesting stuff. Let me know what you guys and gals think about this chapter. All right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care.